All right, we just want to welcome you guys this morning to the session on successful inclusion and supportive culture and instructional design to meet the needs of all students. We do have captioning enabled, so it should, I believe, just automatically populate for you. And if you have any questions about that, just put it in the chat and we'll be happy to answer. Daniel, you ready to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, and actually about the captions, I was just going to say you probably have to go to the bottom of your screen and there's a button that says live transcript. And if you click live transcript, one of the options is to show subtitles. And so you can turn those on if you'd like. All right, so I am Daniel McNulty. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as we go on, but I'm the director of the Patents Project, and our mission in Indiana as a resource center is to support all Indiana public schools K-12 in creating and sustaining an equitable learning environment for every student. And we do that through three primary lenses. We do it through Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and assistive technology, or AT, and accessible educational materials, or we sometimes refer to that as AIM. And we've been around since 1995. It was started as an assistive technology only project, and worked with assistive technology with Indiana schools for about those first 5 years. And then slowly began to incorporate some other strategies. And then in about 2002, we added the Universal Design for Learning pilot program in the state of Indiana. And we worked with about 52 schools at that point. And then in 2006, we added the Indiana Center for Accessible Materials, or the ICAM. And that's when we added accessible educational materials through the federal NIMAS mandate. And I'll tell you more about all of that stuff as we go on. But a little bit more about me to start with is I like people to know that my background for the last 25 years has been in special education. And I started as an anti-technology paraprofessional and then an anti-technology teacher. And clearly that's not what I am now, being the director of a technology heavy project. And so I like to tell that to make it feel okay. And I'm guessing most of you are okay with technology since you're here, but maybe you work with people who aren't. And they'll say things like, I don't need that, or I can do it without that, or, I didn't grow up with that. I don't understand it. And I just want to say that that's okay, and we can support that, and people's minds can change, and we need to really sort of wrap around them and help that happen. And what happened for me is I won't tell the whole story in the interest of time, but what happened for me is I saw my students with intense, severe, moderate, and severe disabilities, K-6, go from being non-readers and non-writers to being readers and writers over the course of 4 years with them. Which made a tremendous difference in not only their academic lives, but their lives all around. They were invited to birthday parties on the weekends. They had different interactions and experiences on the playground and in the cafeteria, and they were in the general ed classroom more than they were in my classroom. And the main reason for that was me having an open mind and utilizing technology to allow them to show me what they were capable of doing. So after that, in the classroom, I became an assistive technology coordinator and Universal Design for Learning coordinator with the Patents Project for about 6 years, and then have been the director of the Patents Project since 2012. And then in my free time, try to go as fast and far on two wheels as I possibly can, and scuba dive with sharks. And we've got 4 cats, and we actually have a big, I call him a puppy, but he's an 85-pound puppy now that I need to add to that picture. And so that's me.
All right, and I'm Katie Mosley. I'm from the Indiana IEPRC Resource Center, I should say that. We're a state-funded grant through the Indiana Department of Education. The purpose of our center is to increase knowledge, skills, and capacity of Indiana educators to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And what I like about it is that as we're helping the students with disabilities, we're really helping all students. We just may not see it at the time. So we promote inclusive education with a belief in shared responsibility and equitable access to a strong core curriculum with high quality instruction coming from that tier 1 piece that benefits all students. So just a little about me. I have 4 kids, and 2 are graduated from high school now, and we have 2 juniors. And I my background is mostly general education. I worked as an ABA therapist through my undergrad degree, and then I taught middle school English for 19 years. And I got a master's degree. I've never used it. It's in K-12 school administration. I don't think I'm probably ever used that degree, but I'm currently working on my PsyD in school psychology. I love everything about the ocean and the beach, the smell of the salty air and the crashing waves. I just look out there and I can see limitless possibilities for all of us as a human race. And I also love all things Harry Potter. All right, so we want to know a little about you. We just want to know who's here with us today. So you can take your cell phone and you can scan this QR code, or you can go to menti.com and you can enter the code 69883957, and that will get you to our Menti. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and bring up our Menti. And hopefully right now you can see it. Good. Everybody can see the Menti. We just like to know who's here today. So it helps us just tailor a little bit of our presentation towards helping you the best. So it looks like more gen ed teachers, and let's see, we've got some administrators. That's great. The other, if you wouldn't mind, tell us what you do in the chat, or what your position is. No big deal if you don't want to, we're just curious. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that. And hopefully Daniel, I'm guessing you cannot see this presentation. Is that accurate?
I do not see it yet, no.
Okay.
It's great to see so many gen ed and administrators here. That's awesome. We got a resource specialist for Head Start in Marion and Hamilton. That's awesome.
I greatly apologize for the delay.
I think everybody probably completely understands. Any administrators, do you want to share where you're from, what you do?
My computer has decided to do something quite strange.
If you want, Katie, and shoot me the link to the slides and make me a host, and we can try it from this side. Although I think that'll mess up the recording on it.
That's a great question. Let's see. Did this by chance do anything?
Yes, that works, but now we've got the presenter view, so I think you just need to flip it around.
Okay.
Coordinator, cool. Assistant Special Ed Director at Frankfurt. Awesome.
Any luck by chance?
I see just the slides, not in present mode yet.
Goodness gracious. Okay. Going to share the screen.
There we go. You got it.
Okay. I promise to get more with it here. All right, so today we hope that you guys gain knowledge and understanding regarding really 4 big areas. First, considerations for providing that equitable access to high quality tier 1 instruction, because we know that that is so important for our students. And we hope to do that through universal design for learning. We also want to take a look at the educator's role in ensuring the specially designed instruction is provided to meet the needs of students with disabilities. We want to talk a little bit about the research supporting inclusive environments and then give you some practical strategies to promote the success for all students. So here is a Padlet. You guys have access to this. I can put this, I think I should be able to copy and paste this into the chat so that you can have access to it that way as well. So if you give me just a moment, I will get that in the chat for you guys. It has the presentation that Daniel and I are using. It has handouts and it has other resources. So this is the same Menti that we were just on. What words or phrases would you use to describe an inclusive culture? And again, you can just scan that QR code or you can type in the code and I will pull it up here so that we can all see it, hopefully. Hopefully. And let's go to our next question here. All right, Daniel, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see what words or phrases you would use? Beautiful. So what words or phrases would you use to describe inclusive culture? This could be things that you are currently doing, things that you hope to be doing in the future. Words and phrases. Okay, all, yes. Equitable and accessible, absolutely. Data-driven, yes, I love to see that data-driven because we need data to support what we are doing. Including all skill level, yes. Every kiddo has a unique set of experiences and thoughts and ideas to bring. Learner-focused, welcoming, these are great.
So these are great. And I see 2 words up there that are similar, but a little different. I see equal and I see equitable. Anybody know what the difference between those 2 words might be that I'm thinking of? So when we talk about things being equal, we talk about everybody having, yeah, Allison says accessible, equitable. Yeah, so when we talk about things being equal, we talk about things being the same. Like if you get 2 of those things, I've got 2 of these things, which sounds great until we really think about, well, maybe you actually need 4 of those things and I need 1 of those things. And so when we talk about equitable, we're talking more about students having what they need, not necessarily having the same as somebody else. So related to what Patents does and what I've done for the last 25 years, if a student who, if every student has a printed textbook, that's equal. Everybody's got the same thing. But some students need that printed textbook in Braille. Some students need that printed textbook in audio. Some need it in a combination of both. And so that's the difference between equal and equitable. I just wanted to mention that because I saw those two pop up. So good words. And Allison, yeah, accessible, equitable. I think we're seeing the presenter notes again, Katie. Sorry.
Oh, you are. Goodness. Okay. Well, Daniel, I really appreciate your patience with me.
You're fine.
Greatly appreciate it.
So Allison, regarding that word accessible, what does it mean to you or anyone else who wants to answer that as well? There you go, Katie.
Give her a second to type something in if she would like.
Multimodal, representation, engagement, expression, all can share, have a voice. All right, good. So yeah, you led right into some universal design for learning terminology and concepts there. Excellent. All can share and have a voice. I like that.
And that really segues right into all means all. And that's really what we're looking at, that we believe and truly go for this all means all. So Shelley Moore talks about the evolution of inclusion. And it's really a fascinating video about how inclusion began and kind of where we are and where we want to be with inclusion. So if it works, I will play this video. We had some trouble with it, but I'm going to see if we can't get it going. Shelley does have a little YouTube channel, and she talks about just inclusion and inclusive practices. And she has what she calls 5 More Minutes, and it's MOORE. And she just has some great quick tips for educators, great learning, quick little learning videos in case you want to learn something new about inclusion. She is just really great. And the video, hopefully, is going to play.
Order up to 15 free samples. Then take advantage of our best deal when you place an order within 30 days. Save time and money. And order select lines today.
Okay, so I am trying to share my screen. And then I don't know, maybe the Zoom took a long Labor Day weekend as well. Okay. I've lost my Zoom controls. Here we go. Okay.
Welcome to 5 More Minutes. Useful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's topic is the evolution of inclusion. Okay, so you remember the dots? I know. I've shown you these before. One colleague of mine suggested to me once, he goes, What if we didn't look at these as different concepts that compare to each other, but instead as an evolution of time? It was totally brilliant. And we can look at this timeline through the lens of any marginalized population. But to understand this timeline from the inclusion and disability perspective, we have to go back in time. Many of us know or are connected to someone who experienced institutionalization. It was even recommended to families by doctors. Although British Columbia was the first province in Canada to close down their institutions, there are still individuals living these conditions across Canada today. The institutionalization movement is an example of exclusion. It separated individuals with disabilities from their families without choice. But the disability rights movement over the past 50 years, the hard work, incredible self-advocates and families, and maybe a little help from the world that we're there, pushed communities to shift so that individuals of all abilities were welcomed and living in the same settings as their family and friends. This shift from institutions to communities, this was the start of the inclusive evolution. We have movement. But can we do better? Although many individuals are no longer excluded from their families and communities, they were, and let's be honest, they still are, expected to attend segregated schools or self-contained special education programs that are totally separate from the rest of the school community. And so parents started to ask some very good questions. You see, children with disabilities have siblings without disabilities, and families wanted all their kids to have equitable access to community-based education together. Kids started to be integrated into classrooms with their peers. They're in math together. They're in gym class together. They're eating lunch together. Kids are together. This is better. The shift from segregated to integrated schools and classrooms, this is the next step, the evolution of inclusion. We have movement. What can we do better? Well, this is where things get tricky, because integration doesn't take long to realize that just being together, it's not enough. Although in the same classroom, students with disabilities are often just that. They're physically in the classroom. They may sometimes have parallel activities, but mostly it's loosely connected classroom tasks. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just physically sharing space and time is enough to make you feel like you belong in a community. I mean, come on, there are Disney movies made about this. Breathing the same air is not enough. Do you remember the Titans? I do. The evolution from integration to inclusion is now the topic of many conversations in communities and schools around the world. How do we support individuals to be meaningfully included and not just physically integrated? It's not just about where kids go in their day, but why. What is the purpose to the places that they go? It's now school-based teams and staff that are asking questions about how to do this. How can we support purposeful and meaningful placements for kids with disabilities? In inclusive classrooms and schools, students aren't just present, but they have roles and responsibilities in their classrooms and also meaningfully connected to them. This is inclusion. So there you have it, my friend. A brief history of inclusion in about 5 minutes. If this is interesting to you, though, definitely get your local history as well, because every community is in a different place in this journey, and it's so valuable to know where we come from. The other thing, though, is looking at these visuals as a timeline. It really helped me to shift my own thinking from which level am I at or not at, and shift to more about where are we now in our journey and what's our next step. All of a sudden, the goal of inclusion becomes action-oriented. It just feels so much more possible. We may not all be at the same place in the journey. We can all move forward. We can do better. And so this is the question I'm going to leave you with today. Can we still do better? Do you think there's another evolution of inclusion? What might that be? How can we inch even more forward to make inclusion? Thanks, Geraldo.
All right, so if that it was a little choppy on my end, if it was the same for you, we'll get you that link. We'll try to put the link to that in the chat window, but maybe also on the Padlet. But if you have the slides, it'll be in the slides as well. And it's definitely worth a watch.
So one thing that Shelley kept saying was, can we do more? Yes, I'm going to share the Padlet link here in just a moment. Daniel will take over the presentation, and I'm going to do it when he hops on to do his. So just bear with me, please, for just one moment. The goodness. Okay. Are you just seeing the presenter view?
Yes.
Okay. I am going to just present, let's see. Better?
That's better. Looks good.
Okay. So here's our reality is that within our classroom, we have students at all different levels, all different ability levels, all different emotional levels, all different physical levels. And when we reflect back to all means all, do we really mean all means all? If we look at this circle, we can see there are not any two colors that are exactly the same, right? Everything's a different shade, a different hue. And we are trying to teach maybe up to 30 different students who have 30 different needs. So how can we do that? Well, we have to have some foundational beliefs. First, every child learns and achieves to high standards. And high standards may not be the exact same high standard for every student. But learning does include academic and social competencies. So we're not just focused on math, for example. We also have to believe that every member of the education community continues to grow, to learn, and to reflect. And every member of the educational community is responsible for every child. So that means every person from our bus drivers who get to see our kiddos for the first time every morning. And they're the last face that many kiddos see, to cafeteria workers, to our instructional assistants, to the superintendent, to everyone who has any stake in our children. So as we think about Shelley's colored dots and we look at this whole child approach, we can see this triangle. Education is like the field of triangles, right? We have a triangle for everything, it seems like. We really want to take this whole child approach. So as we look at this triangle and we look at it for one child, we might like to just group that one child into one place on this triangle. But the issue, if you want to use that word, is that the reality is more of something like this. There's not just one place where we can put a student, because a student is going to have strengths and a student is going to have areas of improvement. So while a child may be at towards the bottom of that pyramid in that universal learning where they're getting that quality tier 1 instruction and they're being successful in English, that may not be the same for math. They may require more targeted instruction. We can also look at this in terms of behavior and support. Maybe some students need those extra behaviors and supports. And so they might be up in that intensive category, but for the school part, for math, they don't need those universal supports. And so we really need to take a look at the areas of strength, areas requiring less specialized and more normalized supports. And when we look at it from this perspective, we can start to see each child more as an individual. So all of our students have one need in school, but they have a different status. So some kiddos we've identified, they've gone through testing. We know that they may have a specific learning disability in math, let's say. So for this little guy on the left with the red folder who has that disability, he gets help because we have a legal obligation to help him. But the little boy on the right, he might have some of the same struggles, but maybe he's never been tested, or maybe he just doesn't qualify, but he has the same need as the little boy on the left. So just because we have these neurological differences and environmental differences doesn't mean the students don't have the same need. So we really get this false dichotomy that if we don't, the student maybe doesn't have an IEP, we don't need to teach them the same way or to instruct them differently. And that's really something that we have to adjust in the field of education. Leanne Young does a really nice job of talking about this false dichotomy. So as we look at inclusion and what inclusion is and what it is not, inclusion is really about that equitable access to the curriculum and getting needs met within that tier 1 status. And it's not just dumping in the students with an IEP and hoping for the best. Just, we're just going to dump them in and hope that they learn. That's not accurate. Inclusion is a sense of community and belonging. And someone mentioned this in the Menti activity that we did at the beginning, right? It's about belonging. It's about all students feeling like they have a place. It's not just a gen ed teacher with a one-on-one untrained aide. There's educational benefit for all students. So every student in the classroom is benefiting. It is not just mainstreaming, right? That we got like in the early 2000s. It's about independence of the student and that interdependence piece. It's not just having the students in the room and us being able to see them. It's really about them having that independence and that interdependence within the classroom. It's a philosophy that all students can learn, right? We, as educators, sometimes that philosophy may be very challenging to us. We may be challenged by it, and that's okay because we can really grow through those challenges, but we have to have that philosophy that all students can learn, and we have to get it out of our heads that we're doing something just for compliance. It's about breaking down silos, right? Bringing all those differences together. It's not about building those walls up even more than what they may already be in our districts or in our schools. Daniel, do you have anything to add about inclusion?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think one of the things that has been said to me about inclusion that is always in the back of my mind when you think about how you define it and what you think about it as far as being what inclusion is and what it isn't. Somebody said it's being comfortable in the skin that you're in, no matter where you are and who you're with. And so that's, being accepted for, what you look like and present like, but also the way you learn and how you respond to things, and being truly valued in a way that that you're appreciated for whatever value you're adding to the task that is at hand. Which may require you to receive information differently and to respond to information slightly differently, but not being discounted for the value of the information that you have to be able to add is truly, I think, the definition of inclusion.
That's great, Daniel. So benefits of inclusion, I talked about on the previous slide that inclusion really does benefit all students. Research shows us that there are positive outcomes in academic achievement, in higher assignment completion, classroom participation, increased graduation rates, and an increase in post-secondary education. So those are just the academic outcomes, but behaviorally, we also see some great improvements: decrease in office discipline referrals, decrease in number of suspensions, disruptive behaviors, an increase in pro-social behaviors, and an increase in a sense of belonging. Someone in the chat, why do you think the behavior outcomes improve? Anyone have ideas? Oh, Harley, yes, you're exactly right. That peer modeling, that feeling of belonging, right? That's something that all humans want. We just crave that sense of yes, I fit in somewhere, I have friends, but then also that modeling piece so that you can see, a 10-year-old fourth grader can see what a typical fourth grader might be looking like in the classroom. Connection, absolutely. Denise, yes, I like this point that you bring up, right? In self-contained, they want to gain attention, they might act differently. Um, I like that. Yeah, Tawny. Um, she says, when children feel comfortable and included, they are less likely to engage in attention-seeking behaviors, right? They're getting some attention from their peers, so they're not going to need it from the adults so much.
And I think I totally agree with all that. I'll add one little tidbit. I think when we are truly implementing inclusive education, we have curriculum and strategies and physical spaces that are accessible. And of course, it makes sense that if you can't access something, you're probably going to exhibit behaviors. If I go to a conference and I have to read everything in Braille with my fingertips, I'm not going to get very far before I probably have behaviors because I can't access that. I don't have those abilities and those skills. So same things with students who can't read when they show up to an inclusive classroom and we say, all right, we're doing inclusion. We put these kids in here, but they can't access that curriculum. Of course, we're going to be more likely to see behaviors.
All right, Daniel, go ahead.
So this graphic is affectionately referred to as the bagel or the everything bagel. We weren't sure what to call it. And my staff started saying it looked like a donut. And then we evolved into the everything bagel. And what it really is the culmination of about 5 or 6 or 7 of us maybe sitting in an office at the Department of Ed every Friday for about 2.5 years when all the EARNs resource centers met there. And what we did was we looked at ESSA, we looked at the ESSA document, and we looked at the November 2015 Dear Colleague letter from OSEP. And we tried to provide some special ed guidance for the state of Indiana. And that bagel, that everything bagel, is the result of that. And if you look at that like a target, what's in the middle? What's the bullseye? We lost it, Katie. By the way, we're seeing the Menti again.
Oh, you are?
So I'll tell you what the bullseye is. There it is. Outcomes. Now we see it again.
Okay.
So outcomes is the goal, right? That's the bullseye. And we get there through equitable access. Oh, now we're back to the Menti. There we go.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. So we get there through equitable access. And what I really like about this is a few things. One, it's not linear. It's not benchmark or objective based and this and this and this. It's all sort of happening at the same time. And I love that inner circle of shared responsibility, shared accountability, and high expectations. And so what that does in my eyes is it is an active fight against saying things like your kids and my kids, his kids, her kids, their kids. It's all of our students all the time in every building, in every classroom, with every adult. And that's that shared responsibility and shared accountability part. But then the high expectations part that Katie alluded to earlier is super important. Having high expectations for all students all the time. And here's what I've been telling teachers for, gosh, like 17 years now. If you try 5 ways for a student to show you what they know and it's still just not working, call me and I'll come spend the next week in your classroom and we'll figure it out together. And I've been saying that for 17 years. I've never had a teacher call me because if we truly try 5 different ways for a student to show you what they know, they will always be able to show you what they know. Now you might call me and say, hey, I thought of 2 things or I've tried 3 things. I can't quite get to 5. Can you help me? And of course I'll help you. Or my staff will help you and somebody will help you. And we'll try to get to 5 ways, but that's part of that high expectations. I expect you to get here and I expect you to work toward the same state standard as your grade level peers. Now, how we present that to you, how we get you to interact with it and respond to it might look a little different. And that's where we have to maybe be creative or ask for help from somebody like us or from the IEP Resource Center. I also love that overarching theme of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and that underarching theme of multi-tiered system of supports. And I really like this slide in here too. And I challenge you not only to try the 5 different ways for your most challenging students to show you what they know, but I challenge you to stop saying things like, well, they've really got this special need. They've got to have this special thing, their special help, and start replacing the word needs with rights. Students with disabilities have special rights. And I think a lot of us just say special needs out of habit. We hear a lot of other people say it. We certainly don't mean anything negative by it. But if you challenge yourself to replace the word needs when you're talking about students with special needs with the word rights, just do that for a week or so, or a couple of days, and listen to other people talk, and then challenge them to do the same thing, and just kind of make notes and see if it changes the way you think about how we implement accommodations at all. So instead of saying students with disabilities have special needs, we say students with disabilities have special rights. I do think that's an important shift in our mindset that's really kind of subconscious. So that is the challenge then. How do we meet the needs of all learners? We've got a huge variety of students in our classrooms. How do we get through to that? And if you remember that underarching theme of MTSS on that everything bagel, we then break that down into other parts, and we talk about leadership and capacity building, infrastructure and communication and collaboration amongst professionals. And what is the problem solving process? And then what are the multiple tiers of instruction intervention? And what are you basing decisions on? What's the data evaluation of all of that? If you had to choose, and if you don't mind putting it in the chat window, what you think the part of this that your building, your classroom, your school district struggles with the most right now, go ahead and put that in the chat window. I don't think we have time to talk about all of those things, but certainly we can talk about one or two. Clarity of MTSS standards and data clarity. And Haley says communication and collaboration. I think that clarity of MTSS part is you're not unique in that issue. I think, Allison, I think that's an issue everywhere. And Indiana did this weird thing where we were RTI, response to intervention, for a while, and then we went to MTSS, and there are still places that call it RTI. And then if you go ask, in my experience anyway, if you just go ask a random sampling of 10 teachers or administrators or anybody else in the hallway what their school uses and how to define it, I think you'd be hard pressed to even get a 50% rate of people who could define it. So I think that's a great place to start, Allison, is having clarity of what this is, how we define it, what's the language that we use around it. And I talk about, brake jobs and transmission jobs. And if you take your car in, you might be somebody who does those things yourself, but the majority of us are not. And so when the person comes out and starts telling us everything that's wrong with the car, additional stuff they found, and they use 2 or 3 terms that we're not familiar with, they've immediately excluded us from that conversation. And I think that's what has happened with MTSS and UDL and RTI and a lot of things, is that we use terminology that's constantly changing, and we lose people and they check out. So that clarity, I think, is a good point, Allison. Communication and collaboration, absolutely. There's got to be clear channels going on, Harley. And behaviors affecting the general education classroom students with special rights. Behaviors affecting the general education classroom of students with special rights. Consistent intervention that is research-based. Yeah, absolutely. We want to be using research-based practices. In my experience, issue there is that a lot of teachers don't have access to research-based stuff. And so we either need to find ways of getting that stuff to our teachers, and maybe if there's a subscription that can be purchased at the administrative level and provide that, because I think you're absolutely right. We do need to be using that research, and we know there's a 20-year gap between research and the practice being actually implemented. Harley wants to capacity building infrastructure. Yeah, can you talk about that at all, Katie? So as far as the capacity building infrastructure, oh, sorry, go ahead, Katie.
No, you're good. I was just going to go back into this.
So Harley, from my perspective, with the aiming for achievement grants that Patents does, that's one of the main things that we focus on. And that capacity building infrastructure is, for us anyway, if you think about, there's usually one or two or three key folks in a school district driving stuff like this, whether it's accessibility or whatever it is. And then those people sort of grow quickly and they move on, or they get pulled away to somewhere else. And when they leave that school district or that building, everything kind of falls apart. That one person or two or three people were kind of the glue that held it together and kept it driving forward. So in my eyes, with our aiming for achievement grants, the capacity building infrastructure is about creating sustainability. It's about creating policies and procedures and protocols that make it it's really about changing culture in my eyes, so that when one or two or three people leave, the culture of we support every student everywhere doesn't change. It's just the culture that's been ingrained because it's built into our policies. It's built into our hiring process. It's built into our evaluation process. It's built into our exit interview process, and it's built into our professional development constantly, and having consistent terminology. I think from my eyes, that's the capacity building infrastructure part of this, Harley.
And going into that also, sorry, I'm trying to navigate so many different controls here. It's about building that capacity and the understanding, but then disseminating that information as well. Like Daniel alluded to, we often find ourselves in a situation where we have maybe one or two people who are making these changes, but they don't communicate with staff. They don't let the staff know why this is being done. It's important to share with them and to let them ask questions about it. Sometimes when we get into this capacity building and this deep infrastructure of the school, we feel maybe a little threatened when there's a challenge, and just really opening that up and understanding that people aren't asking questions to challenge, they're asking questions for clarity, so that when or if that person leaves, the culture can continue. Because if it's just one person coming in or two people, we're really dealing with a climate, right? We're dealing with the here and now. And we want to establish this culture of inclusion that's lasting throughout, that it doesn't matter the people who are there, but everyone knows what's expected, and then everyone works towards that culture. All right, so what's going to fit that framework, that MTSS framework? Hopefully, some of this will answer some of those questions as well that you have. So really, these supports are everywhere. If we think of, we've kind of got that triangle again. We've got the tier 1 there at the bottom, right, where 80% of our students are hopefully at. I know right now, our triangles may be flipped upside down, right, where we have most of our students needing that intensive intervention. But we have to look at, we can have high ability, we can have English learner supports, we can have Title I, the mental health supports. We can have all of these things, culturally responsive instruction, evidence-based strategies. Everything fits into this framework, and it's only building up to help our students. So good teachers have always recognized and responded to the inherent diversity in their classrooms. At minimum, they understand that they have content and skills to teach. Students who need to learn those things and differences among students that make one-size-fits-all approaches ineffective. This, in essence, is differentiation. right? We know that not every learner is going to fit one mold. Like Daniel said, you might have to try 3 or 4 different methods in order to get the student to be able to help them to learn the material. And we all need differentiation in our lives, even as adults. We need some differentiation because we all have things that we're better at. We just might need more supports in other areas. So differentiation, it is a rooted philosophy in effective learning. So differentiation just only helps those students. It regularly examines evidence of student learning and making thoughtful instructional decisions accordingly. So differentiation isn't just something that we do in a moment. It's not once in a blue moon kind of thing that we do. Rather, we have to be practicing this each day in our classrooms in some way. So it's tailoring instruction in response to patterns in student needs. So with differentiation, we kind of already know where our students are, and we are making adjustments based on that need. Whereas universal design for learning that Daniel will get into is more of a proactive approach. We don't necessarily have to know where our students are in order to implement that idea of UDL. But for differentiation, we do need to have an understanding of where our students are falling in different areas within school. Differentiation is not writing individualized lesson plans for every student, right? Could you imagine if you were an elementary teacher and had 30 different lesson plans, or a middle school, high school teacher, and you've got 100 students you're seeing daily? That is not differentiation. It's designing respectful tasks and using flexible grouping. So respectful tasks mean that each student is able to take in information and to show you that they've learned the information in a way that is meaningful. So we don't want to see a task where we have a student who, maybe you are going to do something physical that the student can't do, and you have them do something that's completely off task from what everyone else is doing that looks completely different, right? That's not going to be very respectful. So if you're in biology class and you're dissecting a frog and maybe the lab table is up high and you have a student in a wheelchair who can't get that high, you're not going to give them a coloring page, right? You're not just going to give them a diagram of the frog and say, you're going to color this part red, this part blue. We really want to find out, how can we help that student? You probably can't change the height of a lab table, but there's something that student can do within that lab that is a respectful task, that is using that idea of flexible grouping, that those groups adjust, that a student isn't always with the same group of peers. It's a way up to standards and learning goals, right? It's not about dropping standards to meet a student where they are, because we talked about, we have to have that philosophy that every student can achieve high goals, that they want to reach those goals and that they can. It's not a way out of standards. It's not a way out of learning goals. It's our job to figure out how to get those students to reach those learning goals. It's critical to improving instruction for all students. When we learn to differentiate, maybe we're differentiating a worksheet, maybe we're differentiating the way we instruct, going back to that small flexible grouping, and having our students rotate, and we're working with just small groups at a time versus large group. But really, you're going to provide better instruction that's reaching all students. It is not more important for certain groups of students. For example, students who are English language learners or our students with IEPs. So things to consider: the classroom community, articulate learning goals, assessments, adapting the content, process, product, and environment. So what things do you need to think about? How ready are your students? What are they interested in? What are their learning preferences? You can begin to build flexible groups based on all of this information. Articulate those learning goals to the students also.
All right. So for the last probably 17 years, I've been rolling this idea around in my head. Like, what is the one question that if I go into a school and just kind of wrap everything that I want to do and build and create and build upon in a school, what's the one question? And I've kind of determined it's this one right here. It's, are you willing, permitted, and able to teach differently, not just teach with different tools? And especially for somebody like me, the director of a technology-based sort of project, um, throwing different tools at a problem, at an issue, at something that we need to do better, is we've got lots and lots of years of data that says it doesn't fix the issue. For example, taking an iPad or a tablet of some sort, taking a picture of a worksheet that we've used for the last 15 years, and now that worksheet's a picture of it is on the iPad, is not teaching differently. It's just teaching with a different tool. And so the willing part of this question has to do with culture and attitude. And that's probably the most difficult part to change in any sort of system, right? The permitted part has to do with policies and protocols and procedures. And I used to, a long, long time ago, say things like, you know what the right way to teach is, just do it. It doesn't matter what the policy is. Looking back, I see that that was an incredibly irresponsible thing to say. Those policies and procedures and protocols matter tremendously. And probably my favorite story that really drove home that point for me was I was called to do a training on iPads back in 2009, when the iPad was first introduced, and I just heard the word iPad for the first time. And a Northeast Indiana school district said, hey, we're buying 88 iPads for all of our students. Can you come train us in July? And this was January. I'm not sure by the time July rolls around, I'll be an expert on that iPad. And I was enough to do a basic training. So I showed up and do this training. 88 teachers have white boxes with brand new iPads, and most of the boxes still have the plastics wrapped around them. And I walked into this room where 88 teachers were, and above the door, one sign said we have a 95% attendance rate goal. And I thought, that's a great goal. The other sign said no devices, and it had a big circle with a line through it, and it listed all of the devices that were not permitted. And at the top of that list was iPad. So I walked in there and I said, before we get started, we gotta address something here. That sign out there says no iPads. You brought me in here to train 88 teachers on iPads. And they said, oh yeah, that they didn't know we were doing this. And not all the staff have them, and that's mostly for students. And I said, look around. I said, I understand that. And the right hand doesn't always understand what the left hand's doing. And sometimes there's conflict. But I said, look around. Most of those boxes are still wrapped. Teachers are not even motivated to take the plastic off. And I said, that policy that's outside the door gives them permission to maintain that attitude, to maintain the culture that what I'm doing now is good enough. And I don't have time to add one more thing to my plate. So the policies and procedures and protocols are incredibly important to the sustainability. Back to whose question was it? It was Harley about capacity building and infrastructure. Then the able part of that is probably the easiest part to change. That has to do with your skills. That's why you come to things like this, and you get on Google and you go to YouTube, and you ask for our consultants to come hang out with you in your classroom for a day. That's the skills part, which are probably the most easy to adjust and to improve, especially for folks like you who choose to come and do those sorts of things. And then the teach differently, not just teach with different tools, is incredibly important. So for example, that worksheet that we took a picture of and put on the iPad is not accessible. That's a picture of text, which is completely inaccessible text until we do something else to it. And in doing something else to it, we have to recognize that we need something like optical character recognition, or OCR, to turn that picture of text back into real text, which allows us then to, I guess to be able to do that, we have to have the knowledge that some students deserve text to speech, and they deserve to absorb text in different way that might not include decoding it with their eyes solely. You can go on to the next one, Katie. And so Katie talked about this a little bit already, but when we look at specially designed instruction versus something like UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, we're really looking at unique versus global in one way to put it. So with specially designed instruction, or SDI, we're looking at very specific needs that one individual needs, and that the case conference committee has agreed upon and put into their IEP. And I think Katie can probably talk more about this than I can, but specially designed instruction is also what the adult's going to do, what the instructor's going to do, the services that that person's going to provide, not what the student's going to do. It's what the specially designed instruction that the adult is going to do is going to look like. Versus UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is designing a learning space that includes the physical space and the strategies and the materials, that are all as inclusive as possible from the ground up before we see a single student, before we see their face, before we see their IEP, before we know anything about them. We design to be as inclusive as possible. So curriculum that's flexible, that can quickly be turned into Braille, that can quickly be turned into audio, that can quickly be responded to with audio or keyboard or pen or pencil, or in all these different ways, without us having to really do anything special to it. It's just built in. So a curb cut in the sidewalk is an example. It's built that way, or a doorway, or a ramp. So this is a great cartoon. And so there's a set of stairs and a ramp that looks like it's going into a school building with snow on them. And there's a student in a wheelchair, and there's 5, 6 other students who are not in wheelchairs, it looks like. And there's an adult shoveling the stairs. And the student in the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And the adult shoveling says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I'll clear the ramp for you. Student in the wheelchair then says, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." So of course it makes sense looking at it like this, but it's kind of that obvious in a lot of ways. If we just take a step back, let's just build the building with the ramp. That's universal design. Which benefits everybody, because I can walk up a ramp, I can roll up a ramp, I can cartwheel or breakdance up a ramp, but there's only one way I can get upstairs. And I did something there, by the way, that was inclusive. I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but I didn't just say, "Let's look at this picture and somebody tell me about it." I described the picture to you, and I described all of what I think are the most important parts of it, because I don't know who is on the other end of, I know some of your names, but I don't know all your names. And I don't know if you can see that picture or not. And so just by saying things like, "Let's everybody take a look at this picture," is already exclusive. It's actively excluding somebody who can't see it. Same thing with hearing, and that's why we had captions on from the very beginning. It's not good education practice for me to say, "I'm going to assume everybody's hearing on the other end of this, so maybe we don't need captions unless they asked for it." Including captions is one of the things you can always do that's always more inclusive, not just for people with hearing impairment, but maybe people in the back of the room, maybe people who just need to have it in multimodal ways. I need to hear it and see it at the same time. And I personally know a lot of people like that in my life.
I think we'll skip over this video. It will be in the Padlet.
Yeah, do go back to those videos and watch them, but I think it is better to skip over those in the interest of time. Katie and I usually do this one in person in a full day. So packing it into an hour and a half, I know it's a lot of stuff, and we'll skip over a few things here and there, but you can always come back to the slides. So the 3 principles of universal design for learning are based on different parts of the brain and brain science. So it's not just Daniel and Katie saying, "Hey, this is good practice, you should do it." It's actually based in brain science, and then different parts of the brain line up when we talk about how we engage with the curriculum, how we receive the curriculum, and how we are able to play with and respond to it. And so as flexible as we can be with those 3 components, the more students we're going to reach right out of the gate without having to do something special like assistive technology or specially designed accessible materials. But the more that we can design with those things right out of the gate, the easier actually and more effective our jobs will be as educators. And so recognizing not only the internal and external strengths and weaknesses and needs and rights, but designing our environments and instruction to maximize those opportunities we have for success with them. And so when I talk about UDL, I talk about it in terms of 2 components. We have physical access and we have cognitive access. So physical access tends to be a little easier to to notice and to address. It's things like not being able to use my hands in the same way, not being able to use my eyes or my ears in the same way, not being able to use my legs in the same way as the person next to me. And we can address those things a little bit easier sometimes because they tend to be more concrete in nature. Cognitive access is a little more difficult. And that's something like if we have a seventh grade student who's reading on a first grade level, how do we provide access to seventh grade content, which we are supposed to be doing? That student deserves access to seventh grade content because they might actually be processing at like a 12th or 16th grade level. And the disability, the barrier might just be the phonetic decoding of that content. And so that's where something like text to speech would come into play. So what about you as learners? Anybody identify as different types of preferring to receive information in different types of ways? And or your students? You should have access to a little Zoom hand. And if you find that, if your students you think strictly learn best by watching something, put your little Zoom hands up. Denise says visual. She said she's a visual learner all the way. Tani, visual and hands-on. Okay, one said watching, one said, how about reading only? Strictly learns best by reading. There we go. Allison's on the right track. Allison says, I am definitely multimodal. I need it in several different ways. That's where we're going with it. Absolutely. And so this whole notion of learning styles has been debunked over and over. And there's actually zero research supporting learning styles. And what I mean by that is, of course, we all prefer different ways depending on a lot of things, right? Different times of the day, different tasks, different settings, different content. We might want it in different ways. But where the learning styles whole thing really failed strongly is that it attempted to define somebody and keep them in that box. He's a visual learner, she's a hands-on learner, and just keep them there, which is, absolutely not the truth. So Allison's definitely right. Harley says visual and hands-on. Yeah, Tanya is visual and hands-on as well. And so for me, it varies quite a bit depending on the content. And it's almost always multimodal for me as well. So when we talk about designing things to be as inclusive as possible from the ground up, when we're talking about universal design, for example, we're talking about being very intentional about the classroom physical space itself, about ways to engage people, about options for presenting information to our learners, and then options and flexibility for students to show us what they know. Yeah, you can keep going, Katie. So go back to that classroom picture real quick. So when I talked about designing intentionally the physical space, this is a classroom with fairly few things on the walls. There's a circle table, a couple of circular tables, a bench, a standard like picnic style table, some couches, some around the campfire style chairs, some therapy balls with holders that students can sit on, a big window in the corner. And so this represents a pretty good physical space in my eyes, as far as being universally designed, just from a physical access standpoint. And one of my favorite things that I heard a teacher say is she said, I never put anything on my walls or hanging from my ceiling that doesn't meet two criteria. One, it has to be strictly aligned to whatever the topic is that we're working on this week. And two, it has to have been created by students. So she doesn't buy stuff. She doesn't create stuff herself and put it on the walls. It's always stuff created by students and is directly tied to the lesson that they're working on. Because classrooms get pretty busy and they get kind of busy kind of fast. So options for where to sit, what to look at, that I'm not going to be over visually stimulated, that everything I am going to see or hear is helpful to what we're working on in that particular lesson. All right, so then we talk about multiple means of engagement. And so this to me is probably the hardest part of this because it's the most abstract. We've got students who are coming at us from a variety of backgrounds with a variety of background knowledge, who had all kinds of things different happen to them this morning and last night, and engaging them all, and of course, different interests, and engaging them all in the same lesson at the same time is incredibly difficult, as you all know. One thing I can say for sure is that choice always improves that. So as opposed to saying, okay, everybody turn to page 37 in your social studies book, I say something like, okay, and you can turn to page 37 in your social studies book, or you can click this link over here, or you can scan this QR code over here, or you can come over here and open this app on the iPad. It's your choice. And just giving that choice is already more engaging. Same for giving choice about how to respond. Denise, I just saw your comment. Teachers like bright colors, but actually is worse for kids. And yeah, I totally agree. And their stimulus, go neutral and calm colors, and less is more. I completely agree with that, Denise. Good comment. So that's the affective network. And a few things I already talked about is, of course, we're going to be more inclusive if we just make things accessible. So if you're using Google Slides, if you're using Zoom, you have access to captions that are built in, and they're built into PowerPoint now too, and they're built into Google Meet, and I just lost the name of the other one, but they're pretty much built into all of them now. The Zoom ones have gotten really good, and I don't know if you've turned them on and have been watching them, but they work pretty well. And one thing about turning captions on all the time for all learners in every meeting, and I notice we have a bunch of administrators here. If you're an administrator, for every meeting that you have with your staff, every meeting that you have with parents, you should have closed captioned. Even if it's just bringing up a blank slide in Google and turning on the captions, just have it there. It should also be, everything you're sending out to teachers, everything you're sending home to families should be accessible so that when they get it, if they can't see it, if they can't read it, if they can't read it in English, they can use a screen reader and access that in text to speech. And it's the same way in classrooms. I don't want to test whether or not you can decode this when I send home a letter to parents. What I want you to have is that information and to respond to it in the way that I've asked you to respond to it. So choices in seating, of course, and I ask adults this a lot too. Do you always do your best work seated at your desk with your hips and knees and ankles at 90 degrees? Or sometimes does it change? Do you, take something over to the kitchen counter, you take it out to the garage with you, or sit on the deck and work on something? And of course, for most people, it does change. There are some people who are like, yep, my best work is always in that desk. But the point is, if I told you where you had to do all of your work all of the time, you'd probably have behaviors. I know I would. All right. We've talked about a lot of these things, choice built in, but relevant content is extremely important. And I think we do things out of habit sometimes because we just don't have time always to constantly come up with new content. And so a good example of this was my youngest daughter, who brought home a half sheet of work, and it said on there, identify the resource that you would use to answer these 7 questions. And it was things like, where do bats live? What do whales eat? What's the climate in whatever place in the world? And they were supposed to use things like almanac and dictionary and encyclopedia and phone book and different resources. And so my younger daughter is far smarter than me. And I'll be honest, I didn't really check her homework most of the time because it was almost always right. But I looked at this one twice and she got them all wrong. And I said, Ella, what's going on? She said, well, I don't know what those things are. I said, did your teacher take you down to the library and show you these things? And she said, no. And I said, well, you're right. We haven't had a phone book in our house in probably 15 years. I don't know where I would even find an almanac. And in my eyes, there's really just three answers to these. It's empirical research, which you don't have access to. It's Google, and it's things like, Wikipedia and things like that. So I think that content was completely irrelevant to her as a student. So of course she wasn't engaged in it. It wasn't meaningful or valuable to her. And it wasn't really a high expectation either. So a couple of tools here real quick. You can use, if you've got Apple devices, Apple Clips is a free app. And what I really like about Apple Clips is as long as it's a tool for creating short videos. And as long as you're holding that record button, it actively transcribes your voice into text. So as soon as you let go, you've got a finished video that looks good, that includes captions that are built in, that's fully accessible. I think it's a great way for administrators to send out quick stuff to their staff, to send out quick stuff to families and parents, but then also for students to respond to teachers. And we kind of been watching the questions, but if you have questions and ideas and comments like Denise's, yeah, definitely put those into the chat window. We'll keep an eye on them. So that's the engagement piece. Then we've got the recognition network. This is the content that we present to our learners. How do we present it in multiple ways? And I already gave you some ideas, present it in actual real text. And a real quick test for that is if you can highlight and copy and paste the text, it's probably real text that can be accessed by a screen reader. If you can't highlight it and copy and paste it, it's probably a picture of text, which is not accessible. But we can present it in audio, we can present it in real text, we can present it in video, we can present it in lots of different ways. Digital materials for them to access again afterwards. Like, for example, you're going to have these slides, you've got the Padlet to go back to, and also extending that learning experience outside of the time and the four walls that we have together. The cultural and language and background knowledge parts of this is incredibly important. And so we make assumptions a lot of times based on where our students live, maybe based on what their economic status is, maybe based on what the color of their skin is, a lot of different things that we base things on that we think students are either going to know or not know. But what the research has been very clear about is that we really are terrible at that. We are terrible at choosing the right accommodations for kids without having data. And we are terrible at making assumptions about what they know and don't know without finding out, without interacting with them and trying some things first. And I think that's incredibly important. And if we miss that piece, we've already excluded those students from whatever it is we're about to teach. So things like terminology, sending home terminology and definitions a week in advance is a great way to sort of level the playing field for some students who struggle with that. And it's a great way for them to come into class. Maybe give those students that struggle a little bit more those terms a week before you give it to other students. Let them have the opportunity to come into class already having that and be the first one to raise their hand and say, let me answer that. I know it. And I guarantee that'll change the way they're viewed in their peers' eyes. All right, so here we get to the concept of what reading is and how you define reading. And I want you to think about that. How do you define reading? And I've been talking about this all along, but here we'll talk about it a little more explicitly. So to me, there's three types, and we can visually read, which is holding up a piece of paper and taking it in with my eyes, assimilating it to what's in there, phonetically decoding it. Then we've got tactile reading, which would be things like reading Braille, reading tactile graphics, reading three-dimensional objects with our hands. And then we've got this concept of auditory reading. And this will be my third challenge. So my first challenge to you was to try to find 5 ways for students to show you what they know before you decide this is their cap, here's what they're capable of. The second challenge was to start using students' rights instead of students' needs. And the third challenge is to stop saying things like listening to a book and start saying things like reading auditorily. And I want to be very clear that when we encourage reading auditorily, we're not giving up on teaching phonics systematically and teaching reading in a systematic and multimodal way. But this auditory reading is part of that multimodal. And for that student I mentioned in 7th grade who's reading on a 1st grade level, who deserves and has the right to access 7th grade content, text-to-speech and reading with his ears is a way that we can get there while we're teaching systematic phonics still. So instead of saying listening to a book or giving into a book on tape, that sort of thing, start saying he's reading with his ears. He's reading auditorily. And you'll run into people who will challenge that. And I want you to bring up the concept of a book club or ask them to take off their glasses and read something far away. It's not a measure of what they're understanding. Let's see, Tani, I saw your question. Could you elaborate and give some examples of the 5 ways for children to show you what they know? Yeah, absolutely. So actually, if we go ahead a few slides, Katie, to the action and expression part. So this is how students respond, or how you allow them to respond, or choices you give them. And it doesn't have to be 100 choices. It can be 2 or 3 or 4 choices, because sometimes too many choices is too overwhelming, right? So you are in control of the choices. But for example, me growing up, every comment on every report card I ever got, every parent-teacher conference said a handful of things. They said things like his handwriting is terrible. Does he practice cursive at home? We can't read what he writes, so he loses points. He's so shy, he never raises his hand or wants to come to the board, but we know he knows the answers. And so all of those things, my whole K-8 academic career, the 2 things that were my teachers were most focused on, my shyness and my handwriting, are 2 things that I've never really used in or I had a problem with my adult life. And what it was for the writing part was that the sound and the feel of a wooden pencil on paper, I despised. And of course, I did as little of it as possible. I didn't want to practice it. So Tani, to respond to your question, all it would have taken was for them to say, hey, Daniel, you can use this pencil and paper, or you can use this keyboard, or you can use this pen, or you can record it with your voice here. It's your choice. So that's one example. And then also, well, I guess that's like 4 or 5 examples of how I could have responded. But then also for, if it's a research paper, so you say the word research paper, we've got a lot of students who are just maybe not going to be researchers. And the idea of that is already exclusive to them and definitely not engaging. And so if we say you can do this research paper, or we're going to go to this site called Make Beliefs Comics, and I want you to create a comic strip about this concept that we're talking about. And they're still going to be doing research and things like that, but they're not writing it out in a traditional paragraph based sort of research paper. Things like using clips and, where students responding using clickers, students responding maybe like, as creative as writing a song, creating a dance. So there's some examples of 5 different ways to show you what they know, that they can respond with their voice. They can respond by creating something in a different way for you. So think about, what is it that I want to measure? And so the whole concept of the state standards. So let's look at state standards. All students, we want to focus on grade level state standards. And so something like seating, if they want to lay on the floor, if they want to sit on the therapy ball or lay in the window, if they're still working on that state standard, that's what I want to measure. I don't want to measure how long they can sit in a chair with 90, 90, 90. So apply that to everything else. Like if I'm truly measuring phonetic decoding, that's one thing. But if I want to measure their ability to absorb and respond to this content, then giving them text-to-speech is a way to facilitate that. If I'm truly evaluating their ability to handwrite, that's one thing. But if I want to evaluate the stuff that comes out of their minds, let's give them a keyboard. Let's not make them handwrite. Let's let them do it with their voice. So that sort of thing, Tani. And honestly, I think it's more fun. Like if we start thinking in that sort of terminology and concept of, let's find fun, creative ways to respond, you're just going to have far more fun as an educator. This is an example. Yeah, go ahead. This is an example of Apple Clips and a student showing her understanding of math using Apple Clips.
Can you see it?
Yep, I think it's going to go.
My name is Nola Thompson. Today, our thing is division. Our division problem is 9 divided by 3. 9 minus 3 equals 6. 6 minus 3 equals 3. 3 minus 3 equals 0. How many times did you subtract 3? 3 times. So 9 divided by 3 equals 3. We got it.
Super cute, highly effective. I guarantee that was more fun for her than going up to the board. And so like for me, I wasn't shy. I've never been shy. I speak for a living. I haven't handwritten a thing in the last 25 years, except for my signature, which isn't even really letters. It's a scribble, and everything is typed or it's done with my voice. And I've done okay as a professional adult. But But hey, Harley asked, sorry to keep calling you Haley, Harley. So when will state assessment become equitable? And so that's definitely something we have to keep in our collective focus. And it has gotten better. I will definitely say that. But I want to say one more thing about that. So let's pretend for a second the state assessment is completely inaccessible and not equitable, like entirely. And so we don't allow our students to use any of these tools, any of these strategies for the other 175 days of the year. For example, I know those days aren't accurate anymore, but because of those 5 days of high stakes assessment, we don't allow our students to use those powerful bag of tricks the rest of the 175 days. I guarantee you they're still going to fail that high stakes assessment. As opposed to for 175 days, we've got this opportunity to use all this magic bag of tricks to engage students in the content and in the curriculum. And even if we have to take away half of those or even all of those, they still have learned more by being engaged for 175 days than not engaged for 175 days. They're going to do better on the high stakes assessment. And I know there's exclusions to that. If a student can't see, they're not going to suddenly be able to see on a high stakes assessment. But it just makes sense that let's not decide what we're going to use through the rest of the school year based on what's allowed or not allowed at the end of the year. Let's engage kids with everything we have during the school year. So that's right. Teachers are rated on those. So again, having non-engaged students for 175 days who can't respond to or receive or interact with content, you're guaranteed to have a worse result on the high stakes assessment than if you do engage them for 175 days and have to take away some of those tools. And so I've seen that happen probably 100 times, where we, give students access, allow them to respond in different ways. And then we do have to take away some of those things for some high stakes assessment, but they still do better than they hadn't had it afterwards. And Harley, if you want to reach out, we can definitely talk more about that, but I know we just hit 11:30. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time and thank you for being here, and do reach out. The IEP Resource Center and Pattons are super happy to work with you and keep helping.
And on the slide presentation, you have my contact information and Daniel's contact information. Please feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions. Remember, Daniel is more Pattons. He's more technology, as displayed by my lack of skill this morning. But I am more your girl for all things if you have more questions about SDI inclusion. We didn't really get to things like co-teaching and those sorts of things, but I'm happy to assist you in any way. So please do not hesitate. That phone number there is my work number. So you can call it, you can text it, whatever you prefer. We do ask you can scan that QR code, or you can just go to that link that I will put in the chat right now. And we just appreciate any feedback that you give us on this. We really want to be here to help you guys as educators, as administrators in the field. So just let us know how we can help. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us.